Have you ever found yourself exhausted, not from doing too much, but from being too much, too strong, too perfect, too unbothered? The world has taught you that to survive, you must become untouchable. That showing pain is weakness. That admitting you're tired makes you vulnerable. So, you built a persona, confident, self-sufficient, maybe even emotionally immune. And while everyone praises your strength, no one notices the silent collapse happening behind your eyes. Because the truth is, being unshakable is not a natural state, it is a performance. And like all performances, it comes with a cost. The erosion of your authenticity. You smile while bleeding inside. You carry others while quietly drowning yourself. You keep pretending you're okay, all while praying for just one moment when you can let your guard down. But Carl Jung reminds us, what we repress does not disappear. It simply finds darker ways to live. So, the more you deny your need to rest, to be seen, to be real, the heavier the armor becomes. And eventually, what was meant to protect you starts to suffocate you. The illusion of invulnerability is one of the most dangerous traps for the modern soul. It whispers that if you're just strong enough, nothing will ever hurt you again. But it's a lie dressed as a goal. Because the pursuit of being untouchable demands the suppression of everything that makes you human. Your tenderness, your grief, your longing for connection. Instead of healing, you build walls. Instead of growing, you hide. And slowly, silently, you begin to disappear beneath layers of control. Jung knew this pattern well. He saw that behind every compulsive need for perfection, for strength, for invulnerability, there is a wounded inner child, terrified of being abandoned, judged, or not enough. So, we overcompensate. We become the strong one, the reliable one, the one who doesn't ask for anything, but secretly aches for everything. And while this may look like power from the outside, on the inside it is a life lived in fear. Fear of rejection, fear of being truly seen, fear of finally collapsing beneath the weight of it all. But here's the truth, Jung would want you to remember, real strength is not the absence of vulnerability. Real strength is the courage to face it, to sit with your pain, to stop performing, to be seen, not as untouchable, but as whole. Have you ever wondered why certain words cut you like a knife, while others brush past unnoticed? Why a simple rejection can feel like an earthquake inside your chest, shaking everything you thought you had under control? The truth is, the world does not hurt us randomly. Pain is never just about what is happening now. It is about what has already happened, deep within. Carl Jung taught us that our outer experiences often reflect our inner realities. The world becomes a mirror, not of who we appear to be, but of where we are still bleeding. What wounds have gone unattended? What memories still ache silently inside your body? That moment someone ignores you, the sting isn't just about them. It's about the child in you who felt invisible. That betrayal, it's not only about this person. It's about all the times you were left, abandoned, forgotten. Life doesn't invent new wounds, it awakens the ones we've buried. That is why two people can go through the same experience, and one collapses while the other stands tall. It's not about the event, it's about the wound it touches. Pain only finds its way in when it echoes something already living inside of us. The criticism, the rejection, the silence, they act like keys, unlocking old rooms within the psyche where trauma still breathes. Jung warned us that these unhealed parts do not disappear with time. They linger, waiting to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be integrated. And until that happens, the world will keep triggering them, over and over again, not to punish you, but to wake you up. Because behind every hurt is a hidden history. And the more you ignore it, the louder it becomes. Your sensitivity is not a flaw, it is a signal. It points to where you are still carrying emotional residue. So instead of asking, why is this happening to me? Ask, what is this trying to show me? Pain is not your enemy. It is a messenger. It is the soul's way of illuminating the parts of you still lost in the dark. And until those parts are brought into the light, the world will continue to act as your mirror, showing you not how cruel it is, but how much healing still remains undone inside of you. We spend our lives trying to stay safe, carefully managing how others see us, controlling how close they can get, predicting what might hurt us next so we can stay one step ahead. We micromanage our words, our emotions, our reactions, all in the name of avoiding pain. But here's the paradox Carl Jung saw clearly. The more we try to avoid suffering, the more we suffer. Why? Because control is an illusion. a beautiful, seductive illusion that promises safety but delivers anxiety. You think if you're just kind enough, smart enough, strong enough, people won't hurt you. You believe that if you make no mistakes, if you never show weakness, you'll finally be beyond reach. But life doesn't work like that. You cannot outsmart pain. You cannot hide from chaos. You can only choose how conscious you will be when it arrives. And as long as you cling to control, your nervous system lives in tension, always scanning for danger, never fully at peace. You are not protecting yourself. You are imprisoning yourself. This constant state of vigilance, this desperate need to manage outcomes, comes from a deeper fear, the fear that if we let go, everything will fall apart. But the truth is, things fall apart precisely because we are holding on too tightly. You cannot prevent life from happening, but you can prevent yourself from truly living. Jung knew that healing begins where resistance ends. The moment you stop trying to force the world into safety and instead start building safety within, the game changes. You stop blaming others for your pain. You stop expecting the world to bend in your favor. And in that surrender, you discover something radical. Pain loses its power when you stop fearing it. When you meet it with awareness instead of avoidance, it transforms. Control keeps you in a loop of fear, of reaction, of exhaustion, but awareness liberates. It allows you to witness the storm without becoming it. And that is where real strength lives, not in control, but in clarity. You do not need to be invulnerable. You need to be awake. Because the moment you stop protecting yourself from suffering is the moment you begin to heal for real. Most people walk through life thinking they're in control of their choices, their feelings, their path. But Carl Jung warned us of a deeper truth. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. In other words, you are not always choosing. Sometimes you are simply following an invisible script written by past wounds, childhood, conditioning, forgotten fears, and repressed emotions. That sharp burst of anger you couldn't explain, that deep sadness that came out of nowhere, that pattern you keep repeating even though you swore you wouldn't. These are not accidents. They are the language of your unconscious, trying to speak through you. The unconscious is not some vague, blurry realm. It is a living system inside you, influencing how you think, what you feel, who you're drawn to, and even how you self-sabotage. And until you bring it to the light, it will keep pulling the strings in silence. While you wonder why your life keeps falling into the same traps, think of your unconscious as the backstage of your soul. It holds everything you didn't want to deal with, every unresolved trauma, every painful memory, every unacceptable emotion. But just because you buried it doesn't mean it's gone. In fact, it's more powerful when unseen. That's why people repeat toxic relationships, why they make the same mistakes, why they feel stuck in emotional loops that seem impossible to break. It's not that they're broken, it's that they're unconscious. And Jung's work was a call to awaken, to shine a light on what lives in the shadows. The unconscious is not your enemy, it is a forgotten part of you that longs to be known. And the more you deny it, the louder it becomes, through anxiety, through conflict, through breakdowns. So instead of asking, why is this happening to me? Ask, what inside me needs to be seen? Because healing doesn't begin when you try to fix your life. It begins when you start understanding the parts of you that have been silently shaping it all along. That's where true transformation begins, not in changing the outside, but in revealing the truth hidden within. We live in a culture that teaches us to escape pain, to numb it, to run from it as quickly and as quietly as possible. From an early age, we were told not to cry, not to be too emotional, not to let the world see when we're hurting. So, we became experts at suppression. We distracted ourselves with work, with noise, with people, with performance. We wore masks that said, I'm fine, while breaking on the inside. But Carl Jung saw through this illusion. He knew that what we suppress does not vanish, it intensifies. It grows roots in the unconscious, where it morphs into anxiety, into self-sabotage, into depression, into patterns we don't understand. That's why healing doesn't begin with positive thinking or forced affirmations. Healing begins with feeling. You cannot integrate what you are still avoiding. You cannot transform what you refuse to touch. Until you feel your pain, you cannot free yourself from it. It will simply keep finding new ways to reach you, through the people you attract, through the emotional loops you repeat, through the breakdowns that seem to come out of nowhere. Your pain is not trying to destroy you, it is trying to wake you up. It's a messenger, a mirror, a signal from the parts of you that have been silenced for too long. Jung once said, "Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses." And how often have you condemned yourself for feeling too much, for being too sensitive, too dramatic, too weak? The truth is, sensitivity is not the problem, disconnection is. When you disown your pain, you disown your power. Because your wounds, when faced, hold the very keys to your transformation. But that path requires courage. The courage to stop pretending, to stop performing strength, and start honoring your truth. To sit with your grief, your rage, your fear, not to fix them, but to listen. Because pain, when heard, begins to dissolve. Emotion, when embraced, begins to move. And healing, when chosen, begins not with resistance, but with radical acceptance. You do not need to be fearless to heal. You just need to feel. And that is where the real journey begins. We've been taught that to become untouchable, we must build walls, emotional armor, psychological distance. We believe that if we can harden ourselves enough, detach deeply enough, pretend convincingly enough, the world will stop hurting us. But Carl Jung offered a completely different path, one that doesn't lead you away from your humanity, but straight into the heart of it. True emotional strength, he said, does not come from protection, it comes from integration. You don't become unshakable by becoming numb. You become unshakable by becoming whole. And to be whole is to know yourself intimately, not just the parts that you show to the world, but the parts you've hidden, rejected, denied, your fears, your flaws, your shadow. The untouchable person is not the one who never feels pain, but the one who has faced pain and no longer fears it. Because once you've walked through your own fire, nothing outside of you can burn you the same way again. Integration means turning inward and meeting all the fragmented pieces of yourself. Your inner child, your wounded parts, your old beliefs, your unmet needs, and holding them, not with judgment, but with understanding. It's not about fixing who you are. It's about reclaiming what you've abandoned. Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming your most authentic self through the union of opposites, light and shadow, ego and soul. And here's the paradox. The more you accept what you once tried to hide, the less power it holds over you. The more you embrace your humanity, the more spiritually anchored you become. You no longer need to prove your worth, perform your strength, or demand validation. You simply exist in your truth. That is what makes you untouchable, not because life stops challenging you, but because you no longer fracture under pressure. You are no longer living in defense. You are living in presence. And presence, rooted in self-awareness, becomes your shield. You do not react, you respond. You do not suppress, you integrate. And in that sacred union, you become whole. What if pain wasn't a punishment, but a sacred initiation? What if your deepest suffering wasn't a detour, but the path itself? In the eyes of Carl Jung, suffering was never meaningless. It was alchemical. It was the crucible through which the soul was forged. We are conditioned to see pain as something to escape, to medicate, to silence. But in the spiritual psyche, pain is a threshold, a liminal space between who you were and who you're meant to become. It strips you of your illusions, your identities, your comforts, and in doing so, it brings you face to face with the raw material of transformation. Jung understood this deeply. He believed that the wound is where the soul begins its work, that only through suffering can we confront the shadow, transcend the ego, and make contact with the sacred within. The very parts of you that have been broken open are also the parts through which the light begins to enter. There is a kind of pain that burns, not to destroy, but to purify. It asks you to let go of what is false. It breaks the masks you've worn, the roles you've played, the safety you've clung to. And in that vulnerable space, something ancient awakens. Suffering humbles the ego. It dissolves the illusion of control. It reveals the hidden architecture of your soul's design. When you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and begin asking, "What is this awakening in me?" you step into the alchemical fire, not as a victim, but as a conscious participant. You begin to see that pain is not the opposite of healing, it is the doorway to it. The sacred wound becomes the teacher. The heartbreak becomes the temple. The breakdown becomes the breakthrough. This is the mystery of inner alchemy. The darkest nights contain the most luminous truths. And when you allow yourself to walk through pain with awareness, what once felt like death becomes a rebirth. This is not just healing, it is transmutation. And in that sacred process, your soul remembers who it came here to be. there comes a moment on the spiritual path when the mask begins to crack. The smile you've rehearsed no longer fits. The identity you've worn so convincingly begins to feel heavy. This is the death of the persona, the false self we created to be accepted, admired, and safe in a world that taught us who we needed to be, rather than inviting us to become who we truly are. Carl Jung described the persona as a social mask, a necessary tool for navigating society, but also a prison if we forget that it's just a mask. Over time, we begin to confuse the mask with the self. We believe we are the role, the successful one, the strong one, the good girl, the achiever, but the soul does not care about performance. The soul longs for truth, and the death of the persona is not a tragedy, it is a liberation. It is the moment when the soul begins to take the lead. Unlearning the false self requires courage, because to let the mask fall is to risk rejection. It is to sit in the discomfort of not knowing who you are without the labels, the applause, the perfectionism. But this is the necessary unraveling, the dismantling of ego illusions that once kept you safe, but now keep you small. When the persona dies, what is reborn is your essence, your realness, your humanity, and your connection to the divine. This is not about becoming something new, it's about remembering what you've always been underneath the performance. The spiritual path is not an ascent into perfection, but a descent into authenticity, and it is often through crisis, loss, or deep emotional suffering that the persona crumbles, revealing the truth that your worth was never in what you did, but in who you are. In letting go of the image, you make space for the soul to speak, and that voice, quiet, ancient, and real, becomes your compass. No longer driven by fear of judgment, you begin to live in alignment with your inner truth. This is the true self, not constructed, but revealed, not performed, but remembered. Awakening is a journey that often leads to solitude, not because you are alone, but because you no longer belong where you once fit so comfortably. As you begin to shed the masks and illusions, you find that the surface life, with its noise and distractions, no longer satisfies you. Carl Jung understood this deeply. True transformation requires descending into the depths of your being, a place where few dare to venture. And when you go inward, you inevitably move away from the crowd that remains on the shallow shore. This distancing isn't rejection, it's maturation. It's the natural result of growing into your authentic self, while others cling to their familiar patterns and defenses. You might find that old friendships feel superficial or draining. Conversations that once energized you now seem hollow. The world that once felt safe now feels foreign. This solitude is not loneliness, but sacred space. It is a necessary crucible for growth. In this silence, you hear the whispers of your soul, the subtle movements of your inner truth. It is where clarity emerges, unfiltered by others' expectations or judgments. But this path is not easy. It can feel isolating because few can truly accompany you on this inner descent. You may crave connection but find it difficult to share what you're becoming with those still on the surface. Jung warned that individuation, the process of becoming whole, often requires leaving behind old attachments and identities. This is not abandonment, it is evolution. You are not pushing people away out of pride or anger, but because you no longer fit where you once hid. And in that space of solitude, you discover the depth of your own being. You learn to be your own companion, your own refuge. You find that the truest connection begins within, and from that grounded place, you can eventually engage with the world, not as a fractured self-seeking approval, but as a whole being standing in profound presence. True protection does not come from walls or armor, it comes from clarity. Carl Jung taught that consciousness, the deep, awake awareness of what is happening within us, is the ultimate shield against life's inevitable challenges. When you understand your triggers, your wounds, and your patterns, the world loses its power to knock you off balance. You may still feel pain, disappointment, or loss, but you no longer drown in those emotions. Instead of reacting unconsciously, you respond with presence. This clarity is not about becoming cold or indifferent. It is about becoming vividly alive to your inner landscape. It is about knowing yourself so well that external events cannot destabilize your core. The storms of life may rage, but inside you hold a calm center, an unshakable consciousness that remains steady amid chaos. Living with this kind of clarity means you no longer waste energy on control or resistance. You see the impermanence of all things, including your own emotional states. You accept the full spectrum of your experience, light and shadow, joy and sorrow, with openness and equanimity. This awareness creates a profound sense of freedom, because you realize that nothing outside you can hurt you unless you allow it. You become like a deep ocean. Waves may crash on the surface, but beneath lies vast, tranquil depth. The world may try to knock you down, but there is no place for it to land. This is not a place of detachment, but of integration, a consciousness that embraces all parts of yourself and life's mysteries without being overwhelmed by them. And that is the highest form of strength, not resistance, but presence, not armor, but awakening. Because when you live in this way, nothing and nobody can truly hurt you again. In the final chapter of this journey, it's essential to remember one fundamental truth: building walls does not protect you, it isolates you. You might have been conditioned to think that emotional armor, masks, and distance will keep you safe from pain, but these defenses only push you further from yourself and from the healing you seek. Carl Jung's wisdom calls us to dive deeper, instead of retreating higher, to descend into the depths of our being rather than skimming the surface. True safety is found not in avoidance, but in presence. It is found in embracing your whole self, the light and the shadow, the wounds and the strengths, the fears and the hopes. When you dive beneath the surface, you enter a place of profound silence and power. Here, the turbulence of the external world loses its grip, because you have discovered an inner sanctuary built on awareness and acceptance. This is not an easy path. It asks you to face what you have long hidden. It asks you to stop pretending and start feeling. It requires courage to sit with discomfort and allow transformation to unfold naturally. But the reward is freedom. Freedom from being a puppet to pain, fear, and external validation. Freedom to live authentically, rooted in the deep knowing of who you are beyond the masks. Jung's message is clear. When you stop fighting the waves and instead learn to swim in their depths, you discover a strength that no storm can break. So don't build walls. Dive deeper. Meet yourself with compassion and courage. Let pain be your guide, not your jailer. This is where true healing begins. This is where you become truly untouchable, not by avoiding life, but by fully embracing it. And that is the journey of awakening, the journey of becoming whole.